I often wonder if there's some kind of cosmic lottery for terrible HOA presidents, and if my neighborhood, the otherwise tranquil Willow Creek Estates, had somehow hit the inverse jackpot. Because Brenda Grimshaw wasn't just bad. She was a force of nature, a self-appointed monarch in a kingdom of beige vinyl siding and meticulously manicured lawns. And for a glorious, terrifying few hours, I made her gilded cage a reptile house. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe this. This whole insane saga, the one that nearly got me arrested and instead ended up with Brenda, her awful husband Richard, and half the HOA board desperately trying to levitate onto my dining room table, started, as these things so often do, with a perfectly reasonable request that spiraled into utter madness. It all began innocently enough. I was planning a much-needed 3-week vacation. A solo trip to Southeast Asia, a reward for completing a particularly grueling project as an independent consultant specializing in secure environmental design and, shall we say, unusual containment solutions for private collectors and, occasionally, very specific zoological needs. My house, a modest but modern 2-story, with a lovely, secluded backyard and, critically, a large, old-fashioned fieldstone chimney, was my sanctuary. Apparently, it was also Brenda Grimshaw's prime target for her next social power play. I was tending my somewhat rebellious vegetable garden, a patch of cheerful defiance in a neighborhood where even the petunias seemed to stand at attention, when Brenda's gleaming white Cadillac Escalade, a vehicle roughly the size of a small amphibious assault craft, silently pulled up to the curb. Brenda herself emerged, a vision in a blinding fuchsia pantsuit that looked like it had mugged a flamingo. Her hair, a lacquered helmet of improbable blonde, seemed to defy gravity. "Alex, darling," she chirped, her voice a saccharine weapon. "Just the person I wanted to see." I suppressed a sigh. My interactions with Brenda were usually limited to curt nods during her imperious neighborhood patrols, or receiving passive-aggressive newsletters about the precise acceptable shade of off-white for mailbox posts. This direct approach felt ominous. "Brenda," I acknowledged, wiping dirt from my hands, "what can I do for you?" She surveyed my property with an appraising glance, like a queen inspecting a peasant's hovel and finding it surprisingly well kept. "Well, Alex," she began, clasping her hands, her oversized gold rings glinting. "As you know, the annual Willow Creek Summer Social is just around the corner. And, well," we were thinking. The we in Brenda speak always meant I, with the terrified nodding agreement of anyone unfortunate enough to be in my orbit. I braced myself. "Your house, darling, it's just perfect. That lovely open-plan living area, the big kitchen, and that divine patio. We were thinking it would be the ideal venue for this year's festivities." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "My house?" I repeated, ensuring I hadn't misheard through a haze of fuchsia. "For the HOA social," she beamed, mistaking my shock for delighted surprise. "Exactly. It's so much more intimate, more welcoming than the clubhouse, don't you think? And that community center is so dreadfully sterile. Plus, we heard you're going on a little trip soon." My blood ran a little cold. How did she know about my trip? I'd only told a couple of close friends. Willow Creek's gossip mill, evidently lubricated by Brenda's insatiable curiosity, was disturbingly efficient. "Yes, I am," I said carefully. "Which means I won't be here to host." Brenda waved a dismissive hand, nearly concussing a passing bumblebee with a gold bangle. "Oh, don't you worry your clever little head about that, Alex. That's the beauty of it. You'll be off gallivanting, and we can just use the house while you're gone. Free of charge, of course. We'll take marvelous care of everything. Think of it as your contribution to community spirit." I felt a slow burn start in my chest. The sheer audacity. She wasn't asking. She was informing. My home, my private sanctuary, was to be commandeered for an HOA shindig while I was thousands of miles away, simply because it was convenient and, apparently, free. "Brenda," I said, my voice remarkably level, "I appreciate the thought, I suppose, but my house isn't available. I'm not comfortable with anyone, HOA or otherwise, having a party here while I'm away. or even while I'm here, for that matter. It's not really set up for large gatherings. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the fuchsia fabric of her pantsuit straining slightly as she shifted her weight. Not comfortable? She repeated, her voice losing some of its superficial warmth. But Alex, it's for the community. Surely you wouldn't want to be seen as uncooperative. There it was. The veiled threat, the implication that refusing her imperial decree would mark me as a pariah. My resolve hardened. I've dealt with challenging clients, hostile governments, and even a few particularly territorial primates in my career. Brenda Grimshaw and her fuchsia power suit didn't intimidate me. Brenda, I stated, firmly but politely, my answer is no. My home is private property, and it's not available for your event. I'm sure you can find a suitable alternative. For a moment, she just stared, her painted-on eyebrows arching towards her blonde helmet. I could almost see the gears grinding in her head, recalibrating, searching for a new angle of attack. Her husband, Richard, a perpetually flustered man who always looked like he'd misplaced his car keys and possibly his dignity, often trailed in her wake. He was mercifully absent today. He'd probably just nod sagely at whatever nonsense she spouted. Well, she finally sniffed, her nose tilting upwards. That's disappointing, Alex. Very disappointing. We'll have to note your lack of community participation. The threat was less veiled now, more of a blunt instrument. I just nodded. Noted. She gave my garden a look that suggested it was single-handedly lowering property values, turned on her heel with a swish of fuchsia, and glided back to her Escalade. As the oversized SUV purred away, I had a sinking feeling this was far from over. Brenda Grimshaw was not a woman who took no for an answer, especially when it came to her own perceived authority. I spent the rest of the afternoon installing a few extra, discreetly placed, high-resolution security cameras around the property. My existing system was decent, but Brenda had a way of inspiring an upgrade. I made sure they had cloud backup and motion alerts that would ping my phone wherever I was in the world. My trip was in 10 days. I started a meticulous log, just in case. The first entry, June 12th. Brenda Grimshaw, HOA President, requested use of my house for HOA party. Request denied. Expressed disappointment and implied consequences for lack of community participation. Little did I know, that log was about to get a lot more detailed and a whole lot crazier. The fuchsia pantsuit was just the opening salvo in a suburban war I never asked for, but one I was increasingly prepared to fight with every bit of specialized knowledge I possessed. My professional life often involved anticipating the unpredictable actions of powerful, sometimes irrational creatures. Brenda was simply a different species of the same. The days leading up to my vacation became a masterclass in petty harassment, clearly orchestrated by Brenda Grimshaw from her throne of HOA regulations. First, it was a notice about the non-standard hue of my garden gnome's hat. Apparently, crimson mischief was not on the approved palette of lawn ornament attire. I'd had that gnome for years. It was a gift from my eccentric Aunt Carol. I emailed back a polite query, requesting the official HOA Pantone color chart for gnome haberdashery. I received no reply, just a second, more sharply worded notice. Then came the citation for my recycling bin, being 2 inches too close to the curb on a non-collection day. 2 inches. Richard Grimshaw, Brenda's shadow, was spotted by my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, elderly lady with surprisingly sharp eyesight and a penchant for curtain twitching, meticulously measuring the distance with a tape measure, his face a mask of concentration, while Brenda supervised from the climate-controlled comfort of her Escalade. I paid the $15 fine online, attaching a note. Consider it a contribution to the Brenda Grimshaw Needs a Hobby Foundation. I doubt she appreciated the humor. The pressure was clearly designed to make me reconsider her generous offer to use my house. Each citation, each passive-aggressive email from the HOA's vaguely threatening account, HOA compliance, at Willow Creek States, net, probably Brenda herself using a stern font, was a little nudge, a reminder of her power. But, if she thought this would make me cave, She severely underestimated my stubbornness, or perhaps my growing righteous fury. I continued documenting everything: copies of the notices, photos of Richard with his tape measure. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, for the surreptitious snap on her ancient flip phone, time-stamped records of my polite but firm responses. My Brenda file was getting thicker. My flight was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. On Monday afternoon, as I was doing my final packing and running through my pre-trip checklist, passport, visa, chargers, triple-checking that the advanced security system was fully operational and all sensors were online, I received a call. It was Brenda. Her voice was coated in a layer of artificial sweetness that could curdle milk. "Alex dear," she purred, "just calling to see if you'd had a chance to reconsider our little proposal. The summer social committee is finalizing plans, and we still think your lovely home would be just the ticket. We could even arrange for a professional cleaning crew to come in afterward, all on the HOA's dime, of course. So you wouldn't have to lift a finger when you return." The HOA's dime was, of course, our dime, the collective funds of the homeowners, many of whom were likely unaware their fees might be subsidizing Brenda's entitlement. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice calm, and even though my knuckles were white on the phone, "my position hasn't changed. My house is not available." I thought I made that clear. There was a pause. Then a distinct chill entered her voice. "Well, Alex, that's a real shame. A real shame for everyone. Some might even see it as rather selfish, given the circumstances. Enjoy your trip." And she hung up. The implied threat was palpable. That evening I did a final sweep of the property. I double-checked all window locks, reinforced the back patio door with an extra security bar, and made sure the motion-activated floodlights were angled for maximum coverage. The new cameras I'd installed were feeding crystal-clear HD video to a secure cloud server, and I had the app on my phone and tablet. I even placed a few extra, less obvious audio recorders near the main entry points, strictly for ambient environmental sound monitoring, of course. I left a detailed itinerary and emergency contact information with Mrs. Henderson, who promised to keep an extra eye out and water my rebellious vegetables. She gave me a sympathetic pat on the arm. "Don't you worry about that, Brenda dear," she whispered conspiratorially. "She's all hat and no cattle, as my father used to say. Though in her case, it's all fuchsia pantsuit and no, well, you know." I appreciated her sentiment, but I had a feeling Brenda was more like a venomous snake in designer clothing, all show, but with a nasty bite if provoked. Or even if unprovoked, but merely inconvenienced. I left for the airport before dawn, feeling a knot of unease that even the excitement of my impending adventure couldn't entirely dispel. It was about 14 hours later, after a long flight and a transfer, that I landed in Bangkok. As I waited for my luggage, bleary-eyed but thrilled to have arrived, my phone buzzed with a series of notifications. Motion detected. Front door. Motion detected. Living room window. Motion detected. Kitchen door. My heart leaped into my throat. Adrenaline surged through me, washing away the jet lag. I quickly opened the security app. The live feeds loaded. There, on my screen, bold as brass, was Brenda Grimshaw, accompanied by her simpering husband Richard and two other HOA board members I vaguely recognized, a nervous-looking man named Gerald, and a woman with a perpetually disapproving expression, Agnes. Brenda was fiddling with my front door lock. Richard was holding a toolbox. My toolbox, that I kept in the garage. My supposedly secure, locked garage. Panic, mingled with white-hot rage. They were breaking into my house. My beautiful, private, locked house. I watched, horrified, as Richard, after a few clumsy attempts, managed to pop the lock. The app recorded it all. The distinct click. Brenda's triumphant smirk as she pushed the door open and swept inside like she owned the place, followed by her entourage. "See?" Brenda's voice, tinny but clear through the audio feed. "Piece of cake. Alex really should have been more accommodating. This is much better, isn't it? Perfect for the social. Richard, start moving that hideous armchair, will you? And Agnes, check the refrigerator. See if that inconsiderate girl left anything useful for appetizers. My hands were shaking. I immediately dialed the Willow Creek Local Police Department, my voice tight with urgency as I explained that my house was currently being broken into by my HOA president and several board members, that I was out of the country but watching it happen live on my security feed. The dispatcher, a bored-sounding young man, took my details with an air of profound disinterest. An HOA dispute, ma'am? He drawled. Yes, but they're in my house. They broke in. I have video evidence. I insisted, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. We'll send a car by when one is available, he said dismissively. These neighborhood things, they usually sort themselves out. Click. He hung up. Stunned, I stared at my phone. When one is available? They were burglarizing my home. I tried calling back, demanding to speak to a supervisor. I was put on hold, then eventually told the same thing. No urgency, no concern. An icy dread began to seep through me. This wasn't just incompetence. This felt deliberate. Brenda's influence clearly extended further than I'd imagined. For 2 agonizing hours, I watched them. Watched them rifle through my belongings, critique my decor. Good heavens, that wallpaper in the guest bathroom is a travesty, Agnes declared, examining a perfectly tasteful William Morris print, and discussed their party plans. They helped themselves to some fancy crackers I'd been saving. Brenda even tried on one of my silk scarves, preening in front of the hall mirror. It was a surreal, infuriating, and deeply violating experience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a single police cruiser idled up to my house on the video feed. 2 officers got out, sauntered to the door, and knocked. Brenda opened it, all smiles and charm. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly from the external cameras, but after a few minutes of animated discussion, during which Brenda gestured expansively and the officers nodded, they simply left. They didn't go inside. They didn't arrest anyone. They just got back in their car and drove away. My screen showed Brenda waving cheerfully after them before closing my front door, a smug look of triumph on her face. That was it. The police, my supposed protectors, were clearly in her pocket, or at the very least, utterly unwilling to cross the mighty Brenda Grimshaw. I was alone in this. Thousands of miles away, watching my home be invaded, with no recourse through the normal channels. The injustice of it burned like acid. The initial shock and anger began to cool, replaced by something far more dangerous, cold, methodical resolve. If the system wouldn't help me, if Brenda thought she could operate with impunity, she had another thing coming. My vacation was officially over before it had even begun. My specialized knowledge wasn't just for designing secure environments for exotic animals anymore. It was time to design a very specific, very personal, and very memorable containment solution for a nest of suburban vipers. Brenda wanted a party in my house? Oh, she was going to get one she'd never ever forget. The first thing I did was book the earliest possible flight back home. This wasn't just about a break-in anymore. This was about principle. This was about reclaiming my home, my peace of mind, and delivering a message so clear it would echo through Willow Creek Estates for years to come. The rage was a steady burn now, fueling a meticulous mind that thrived on complex problems. My business often involved understanding animal behavior, predator-prey dynamics, and, crucially, how to create environments that were inescapable until desired. I started making a different kind of list on my phone, no longer about tourist attractions, but about acquiring certain party favors. The flight back was an 18-hour blur of simmering fury and intricate planning. My mind, usually occupied with schematics for reinforced enclosures or logistical nightmares of transporting rare species across continents, was now hyper-focused on Brenda Grimshaw and her coterie of HOA sycophants. The footage from my security system was damning. I had hours of it. Brenda and her crew casually violating my home, their voices clear, their faces unobscured. Richard Grimshaw, bless his incompetent, enabling heart, had even looked directly into one of my new high-definition cameras while attempting to rewire my sound system for better party ambiance. His expression one of dawning confusion, as if he sensed he was being watched by a malevolent electronic god. Agnes, the disapproving board member, was caught meticulously inspecting the contents of my spice rack, tutting at my choice of imported saffron. Gerald, the nervous one, mostly wrung his hands and looked like he wished the earth would swallow him, but he was there, complicit. The police non-response was the bitterest pill. I had recordings of my calls, the dispatcher's infuriating nonchalance, and the video of the officer's cursory, almost friendly chat with Brenda on my doorstep before they simply abandoned their duty. This wasn't just about a rogue HOA. This felt like systemic corruption, a small-town cabal where the lines of authority were hopelessly blurred by personal connections and petty power. Upon landing back in the U.S., my first stop wasn't home. I went straight to a pre-arranged secure storage unit I maintained for contingencies related to my more sensitive consultation work. Inside, amongst various specialized tools and equipment, was a reinforced climate-controlled transport crate. My mind was already working through the logistics, timing, entry point, containment, and, importantly, the controlled chaos that needed to ensue. My initial plan had been something more conventional: lawyers, lawsuits, public shaming, but the police inaction had radicalized me. Brenda had escalated this beyond bylaws and property lines. She'd made it personal, and she'd shown contempt for the law itself. My response needed to be equally memorable. If the law wouldn't hold her accountable, then perhaps a primal fear would. I spent the next 48 hours in a whirlwind of discreet activity. First, I confirmed Brenda's party plans. A quick, anonymous email to a less fervent HOA member, posing as a confused resident. "Is the summer social still on for this Friday at Alex's house? Just want to make sure I have the right address, since Alex is away." Yielded the desired information. "Yes, Friday evening, 7 o'clock. Brenda said Alex finally saw sense and agreed. So thoughtful. The gall. Next, I made a series of carefully encrypted calls. My line of work had put me in contact with a very particular network of individuals. People who dealt in the acquisition, care, and discreet relocation of creatures that didn't often appear on official import manifests. I wasn't looking for anything endangered or overtly illegal, but rather a specific kind of problem animal, one that was large enough to be intimidating, accustomed to certain types of enclosures, and temporarily available. I found what I needed: a 7-foot American alligator, affectionately nicknamed Snappy by his current handlers. Snappy was a rescue from an illegal exotic pet operation, currently in a temporary holding facility, awaiting transfer to a sanctuary down south. His caretakers, gruff but professional, owed me a significant favor from a complex consultation I'd provided a few years back, involving a very agitated capuchin monkey and a locked bank vault. Don't ask. They were willing to loan Snappy for a very short, very specific, and deniable environmental enrichment exercise. The price was steep, but my desire for righteous vengeance was currently priceless. Transporting Snappy was the next challenge. I arranged for an unmarked van, modified for secure animal transport, driven by 2 individuals who asked no questions and whose faces I would make a point of forgetting. My fieldstone chimney, I knew from the original blueprints of the house which I'd obsessively studied, had a surprisingly wide flue, a relic from when it was designed for massive log fires. With the damper removed, which I could do from the fireplace below, it was essentially a stone chute directly into my living room. Snappy, properly sedated for the journey and secured in a custom-built harness I'd designed overnight, would be manageable for a careful, well-orchestrated descent. It sounded insane, I know. But I was operating on a different plane of existence now, fueled by injustice and an intimate knowledge of how to handle large, unpredictable variables. While the party favor was being arranged, I returned to my violated house. The audacity was breathtaking. They had indeed moved furniture. My favorite armchair was now squashed in a corner. There were smudges on my windows where faces had clearly been pressed, and a faint, lingering scent of Brenda's overpowering perfume. I meticulously documented every single alteration, every displaced item, Every fingerprint I could find that wasn't mine, adding it all to the Brenda file. I then set about preparing the house. This wasn't just about dropping an alligator into a party. It was about containment and control. I disabled all manual overrides on my smart locks for the doors and windows. They would only open with my specific remote command. I subtly reinforced the base of the chimney with some strategically placed metal sheeting from the inside, making it a one-way trip down. I also rigged a silent, near-infrared camera directly overlooking the fireplace hearth, giving me a perfect view of Snappy's grand entrance and the subsequent festivities. The existing security system would capture everything else. I took a perverse pleasure in arranging a small, almost unnoticeable pile of Brenda's discarded HOA notices and a copy of the bogus gnome hat citation directly in the fireplace, like kindling for the coming inferno of her social downfall. The final touch was ensuring Snappy's well-being post-event. I contacted a reputable herpetologist, Dr. Evans, an old colleague known for his discretion and expertise, briefing him on a hypothetical containment breach involving a large crocodilian in a residential setting, and prearranging for his emergency consultation services for Saturday morning, citing a need for secure removal and relocation. He was intrigued, if slightly bewildered. I left out the part about the HOA and the chimney, of course. He just needed to be ready to handle a confused and likely grumpy alligator. By Thursday night, everything was in place. I felt a strange calm descend over me. It was the same focused intensity I experienced before a complex project launch, every contingency considered, every variable accounted for. Brenda wanted my house for her party. She was about to get it, with one uninvited guest who was guaranteed to make a splash. I even put out a bowl of cheap tortilla chips on the coffee table. It seemed only polite to offer refreshments. After all, my mother always said, never show up to a party empty-handed, or, in this case, never host one without a 7-foot reptilian bouncer. I considered leaving a small sign next to the chips. Compliments of Alex. Enjoy the bite. But I decided against it. The element of surprise was far more satisfying. Friday evening arrived with an almost cinematic sense of anticipation. I was ensconced in a discreet rental property a few blocks away, a makeshift command center monitoring my multiple security feeds on a laptop. My phone was fully charged, emergency numbers pre-dialed, not for the local Willow Creek Police, of course, but for the county sheriff's department and state animal control, who I suspected would be far less susceptible to Brenda Grimshaw's dubious charms. The weather was perfect for an illicit HOA gathering, warm, slightly humid, the kind of evening that encourages open windows and mingling on patios, neither of which would be an option for my uninvited guests tonight. At precisely 6:57 p.m., Brenda's white Escalade, gleaming under the streetlights, pulled up in front of my house. She emerged, resplendent in a garish, sequined caftan that looked like a disco ball had exploded on a muumumu. Richard, wearing a truly unfortunate Hawaiian shirt, scurried around to open her door. He was carrying a tray of what looked suspiciously like my stolen crackers, now adorned with some unidentifiable paste. Agnes and Gerald arrived soon after in Gerald's sensible sedan, along with 2 other board members I recognized as Brenda's most loyal acolytes. A stout woman named Doris, who always seemed to be knitting, and a thin, perpetually smirking man named Howard, who considered himself the HOA's unofficial legal expert despite having no actual law degree. A few other, presumably unsuspecting, neighbors began to drift towards my house, drawn by the promise of a free social event. They had no idea what they were walking into. My camera showed Brenda producing a key, a freshly cut, shiny new key, so they hadn't just broken in once, they'd had a duplicate made. The sheer, premeditated arrogance of it reignited my fury. With a flourish, Brenda unlocked my front door and ushered her guests inside. "Welcome, welcome." Her voice echoed faintly through the audio feed. Alex sends her apologies for not being here, but insisted we use her lovely home. So generous. The lie was so blatant, so effortlessly delivered. It was almost admirable in its villainy. The partygoers, about 15 in total, mingled in my living room, completely oblivious. Richard fussed with the speaker system again, managing to get some truly awful smooth jazz to play. Agnes was already scrutinizing my bookshelves. Meanwhile, half a mile away, under the cover of darkness in a secluded alley backing onto the greenbelt behind my property, the unmarked van had arrived. Snappy, mildly sedated but still impressively imposing, was carefully hoisted in his custom harness. My prearranged delivery team, two silent, efficient figures dressed in dark clothing, began the delicate ascent of the exterior of my house. Using climbing gear and a route I'd mapped out that avoided direct lines of sight from the street. It was a high-risk maneuver, but they were professionals. My heart pounded as I watched a separate, discreet camera feed showing their progress. Inside the house, the party was in full swing, such as it was. Brenda was holding court, recounting some doubtlessly embellished tale of her latest HOA triumph, while her guests munched on the pilfered crackers and sipped cheap white wine from plastic cups. The smooth jazz droned on. At 7:32 p.m., the delivery team reached the top of my chimney. I got the ready signal via a secure messaging app. In my living room, completely unbeknownst to the revelers below, the heavy cast-iron damper, which I had previously unlatched, was slowly, silently winched open from above. My infrared camera pointed at the hearth showed nothing but darkness, then a faint shower of soot. I held my breath. Then, with a surprisingly gentle thud, Snappy landed on the pile of HOA notices in my fireplace. The harness was remotely released, and the ropes were withdrawn. Snappy, disoriented for a moment from the sedation and the unusual mode of entry, shook his massive head. He was magnificent. 7 feet of primeval predator, right in the heart of Brenda Grimshaw's ill-gotten party. For a few seconds, nobody noticed. The music, the chatter, Brenda's booming voice, it all continued. Then Agnes, who had wandered close to the fireplace to examine a painting, let out a small, perplexed, "Oh my!" Snappy, perhaps smelling the crackers or just taking stock of his new, confusing surroundings, let out a low, guttural hiss. It wasn't a roar, but it cut through the smooth jazz like a knife. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Doris dropped a knitting needle. Then Brenda, mid-anecdote, finally saw him. Her eyes, already wide from her theatrical storytelling, seemed to triple in size. The color drained from her face, leaving her fuchsia caftan looking even more shockingly bright against her sudden pallor. For a glorious frozen moment, there was absolute silence, punctuated only by Snappy's occasional soft hiss and the faint clinking of ice in rapidly abandoned plastic cups. Then, chaos erupted. Richard was the first to scream, a high-pitched yelp that would have shamed a startled chihuahua. Agnes, displaying an agility I wouldn't have thought possible, leaped onto a nearby ottoman, shrieking, "It's a dragon! A real-life dragon!" Gerald simply fainted, collapsing in a heap by the stolen crackers. Brenda, after her initial paralysis, found her voice. "What in the Sam Hill is that thing?" she bellowed, pointing a trembling, sequined finger at Snappy, who had now decided to take a few exploratory steps out of the hearth and onto my very expensive Persian rug. He seemed particularly interested in Richard's Hawaiian shirt. As the screams escalated, and people began scrambling away from the advancing alligator, I calmly picked up my phone. With a few taps on my smart home app, I engaged all exterior door and window locks. Click, click, click. My house was now a fortress. A fortress with a very large, very scaly, and very confused reptilian guest of honor. My expression, as I watched the pandemonium unfold on my screen, was one of profound, righteous satisfaction. The party had officially started. The scene inside my living room, as relayed by my strategically placed cameras, was pure, unadulterated pandemonium. Brenda Grimshaw, whose usual mode of operation involved imperious commands and icy disdain, was now reduced to a sputtering, terrified mess, trying to climb onto the back of my sofa while shrieking at decibels I hadn't thought humanly possible. Her sequined caftan offered little in the way of climbing purchase, and she kept sliding back down, much to the amusement of absolutely no one in the room. but to my considerable satisfaction in my remote viewing station. Richard, her usually meek husband, had somehow managed to hoist himself onto the mantelpiece, where he clung precariously, his Hawaiian shirt a vibrant beacon of his abject terror. He looked like a shipwrecked tourist who'd mistaken a crocodile-infested swamp for a luau. Agnes, still convinced Snappy was a dragon, was attempting to ward him off with a throw pillow, while Doris, the knitter, had fainted dead away next to Gerald, creating a small island of unconsciousness amidst the chaos. Howard, the self-proclaimed legal expert, was babbling incoherently about property damage and liability, even as he tried to wedge himself behind a large potted fern. Snappy, for his part, seemed more bewildered than aggressive. He wasn't attacking. He was simply exploring. He ambled slowly around the room, his powerful tail occasionally sweeping a stack of HOA newsletters off a side table, his blunt snout nudging a discarded party cup. His mere presence, however, was enough to turn Willow Creek's finest into a quivering mob. The screams were music to my ears, a symphony of dawning realization that they were trapped. One of the braver, or perhaps more desperate partygoers made a dash for the front door, only to find it resolutely locked. He rattled the handle, then kicked it, his face a mask of disbelief. Others tried the windows, with the same result. The dawning horror on their faces as they realized their escape routes were sealed was a balm to my aggrieved soul. "It's locked! All the doors are locked!" Someone shrieked, and a fresh wave of panic rippled through the room. Now was the time for my next move. I calmly dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency line. "Yes, hello." I began, my voice a careful blend of concern and civic duty. "My name is Alex Riley. I own the property at 12 Losi Lu, Willow Creek Estates. I'm currently out of town, but my security system has alerted me to a major disturbance. It appears a group of individuals, including several HOA board members, have broken into my home and are throwing an unauthorized party." I paused for effect. "And, well, this is the rather strange part. It seems a rather large alligator has also found its way inside the house. It looks like it might have come down the chimney. The people inside are panicking, and I'm quite concerned for their safety and for the animals." The dispatcher on the other end, thankfully not the bored local cop I dealt with previously, sounded momentarily stunned. "An alligator, ma'am? Inside the house with people?" "Yes," I confirmed gravely. "A rather large one. My cameras show it. They all seem quite distressed. And frankly, I'm worried they might try to harm the animal or themselves in their panic. The house is locked, as they seem to have disabled the manual overrides when they broke in." This last bit was a beautiful inversion of the truth. They hadn't disabled them, I had. But framing it as part of their unlawful entry added another layer to their culpability. "We'll dispatch units immediately, ma'am," the dispatcher said, his voice now crackling with urgency. I then made a second call, this one anonymous, to the tip line of a particularly tenacious local investigative reporter I knew had a nose for HOA scandals and bureaucratic corruption. "There's a developing situation at 12 Willow Creek Lane," I said, using a voice modulator app. "Hostage situation, possibly. HOA President Brenda Grimshaw and others apparently trapped in a house with a wild animal, maybe an escaped exotic pet. Might be a big story. Local cops might be involved, trying to keep a lid on it. Click. That should ensure some unbiased media attention, preventing the local PD from sweeping this under the rug." Back on my live feed, Brenda had finally managed to haul herself onto the dining room table, which several other terrified partygoers were now using as a makeshift raft in a sea of potential reptilian doom. Snappy, meanwhile, had discovered the bowl of tortilla chips I'd left out. He nudged it with his snout, sending chips scattering. He seemed unimpressed. Richard, still perched on the mantelpiece, was whimpering. The smooth jazz, ironically, was still playing, a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding chaos. One of the more resourceful partygoers, a woman I didn't recognize, was frantically dialing her phone, presumably 911. Good. Multiple calls would only amplify the urgency. The first sirens I heard were not the familiar, and now deeply distrusted, warble of the Willow Creek PD. These were the more authoritative, multi-toned sirens of the county sheriff's department. Two cruisers, lights blazing, pulled up, followed closely by an animal control vehicle. My little anonymous tip to the press had also paid off. A news van from Channel 6, the one with the Bulldog investigative team, screeched to a halt a respectful distance away, its camera already pointed at my house. This was escalating beautifully. The deputies approached cautiously, weapons holstered but hands ready. They tried the front door, locked. They circled the house, checking windows. All sealed. Through my external audio, I heard one of them shouting, "Sheriff's Department, is everyone okay in there?" A chorus of muffled cries and terrified yelps answered him from within. Brenda's voice, shrill and hysterical, cut through the cacophony. "Help us! There's a monster in here! It's going to eat us all! And this crazy woman, Alex Riley, has locked us in." I chuckled. "Nice try, Brenda, pinning the locks on me, but the breaking and entering was all you, darling," the deputies conferred. I saw one of them on his radio, presumably getting authorization to make a forced entry. The animal control officers were also assessing the situation, peering through the windows with powerful flashlights. Snappy, momentarily startled by the flashing lights outside, had retreated slightly towards the darker corner near my grand piano. Finally, with a nod, one of AHE deputies used a Halligan bar to force my front door. It splintered satisfyingly around the reinforced lock I knew wouldn't give easily. As soon as the door was open, a wave of hysterical HOA members poured out, stumbling, crying, some even crawling. Brenda, disheveled and wild-eyed, her caftan askew, practically fell into the arms of a bewildered deputy. "Arrest her! Arrest Alex Riley!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger back at my now open front door. "She tried to kill us! She put that thing in there and locked us in!" A stern-looking sheriff's sergeant stepped forward. "Ma'am, we understand you're upset, but we need to get the facts. Ms. Riley is the one who reported the break-in and the presence of the animal." Brenda's jaw dropped. The news camera was rolling, capturing her utter bafflement and indignation. Richard, helped down from the mantelpiece by a deputy, looked like he might faint again. Animal control officers, equipped with catch poles and a large crate, bravely entered the house. I watched on my internal feed as they expertly and calmly guided a still confused Snappy into the transport crate. He offered little resistance, likely tired from his unusual adventure. He was out of the house within 10 minutes, safe and sound. The herpetologist I'd pre-booked would be having a rather interesting Saturday morning pickup. As the last of the traumatized partygoers were being interviewed by deputies, providing delightfully contradictory and panicked accounts of their ordeal, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Phase 1. Complete. The Crocodile was out, the HOA was humiliated, and the authorities were now taking this very, very seriously. My only regret was that I couldn't see Brenda's face when she eventually found out just how Snappy had made his dramatic entrance via the chimney flue. Some things, I supposed, were best left to the imagination, or perhaps for the subsequent fire marshal's report on unusual soot displacement patterns. The aftermath was everything I could have hoped for, and then some. As the sheriff's deputies began to piece together the evening's bizarre events, interviewing each hysterical partygoer, the narrative quickly shifted from Alex Riley, crazed alligator-wielding lunatic, to Brenda Grimshaw, HOA president, orchestrator of illegal break-in and unauthorized party, resulting in citywide chaos. My initial call, coupled with the pristine security footage I remotely provided to the lead sergeant, painted a very clear picture. The footage of Brenda and Richard breaking my lock, the duplicate key, their casual rifling through my belongings, and Brenda's voice brazenly inviting people into Alex's generously offered home was irrefutable. The detail about the local Willow Creek PD's earlier dismissive visit and their subsequent failure to act also raised serious eyebrows with the county officials. Brenda, still insisting I was somehow to blame for her decision to commit multiple felonies, was politely but firmly informed that she was under investigation for breaking and entering, trespassing, and potentially endangerment, given she'd let a group of people into a house that then, somehow, became occupied by a large reptile. Her argument that I'd tricked her into breaking in didn't hold much water, especially when confronted with the video of her crowbarring my garage door a few days earlier to borrow my toolbox. My meticulous documentation was paying off in spades. Richard, predictably, crumbled under questioning and spilled everything, tearfully admitting Brenda had persuaded him. This was all perfectly normal HOA business. Agnes, Gerald, Doris, and Howard, faces pale and drawn, quickly tried to distance themselves from Brenda, claiming they were misled or unaware of the full extent of the illegality. The other party guests, the innocent neighbors, were mostly just traumatized and angry at being caught in Brenda's web of entitlement. They became very willing witnesses. The local news lapped it up. HOA President's Party crashed by alligator. Literally, screamed the headlines. Channel 6 ran a week-long special report, Willow Creek Reptile Ruckus, complete with dramatic recreations, though they couldn't quite capture Snappy's bewildered dignity, and interviews with anonymous, disgruntled neighbors detailing Brenda's reign of terror. My name was largely kept out of the initial sensationalism, as I was framed as the victimized homeowner, a narrative I was more than happy to maintain. The fallout for Brenda was swift and brutal. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting, one without her, for a change. Faced with overwhelming evidence and public ridicule, she was summarily removed as president and stripped of all board positions. The motion, I later heard from a gleeful Mrs. Henderson, who attended the meeting with a veritable encyclopedia of Brenda's past transgressions, passed unanimously and with considerable applause. Legally, things got even stickier for her. The district attorney, spurred by the public outcry and the clear evidence of premeditated breaking and entering, filed charges against Brenda and Richard. Their upcoming court dates became the talk of Willow Creek. The investigation also broadened. My carefully compiled Brenda file, detailing years of petty tyrannies, financial irregularities in HOA fund management, hinted at by a disgruntled former treasurer, an ally I cultivated, and the strong implication of influence over the local police, was anonymously leaked to the county investigators and the Channel 6 reporter. This led to a full audit of the HOA's finances and a separate internal affairs investigation into the Willow Creek Police Department's handling of my initial complaints. 2 officers were suspended pending the outcome. Suddenly, my little problem with Brenda had unearthed a much larger den of vipers. As for Snappy, Dr. Evans, true to his word, collected him Saturday morning. He was professionally baffled by the chimney soot on the alligator's hide, but pronounced him otherwise unharmed and commendably calm given his adventure. Snappy was soon on his way to a spacious sanctuary, Florida. His brief but impactful career as an HOA party bouncer concluded. I made a hefty anonymous donation to the sanctuary, earmarking it for extra-large reptilian enrichment activities. My house, of course, needed some repairs. The front door was a write-off, and the Persian rug had seen better days. Alligator claws are not kind to fine silk. But the HOA's insurance, under immense pressure from the newly penitent board and their terrified lawyers, coughed up for all damages without a whimper. They even paid for a deep cleaning, though I supervised it myself this time. The biggest change, however, was in Willow Creek Estates itself. With Brenda dethroned and her cronies scurrying for cover, a new interim HOA board was elected. They were sensible, reasonable people who actually cared about the community, not just about wielding petty power. The ridiculous gnome hat regulations were rescinded. The obsession with mailbox placement vanished. A sense of liberation swept through the neighborhood. People started planting more colorful flowers. Mrs. Henderson even hosted a small Freedom from Fuchsia garden party. My actions, while extreme, had a cathartic effect on the entire community. I became something of a local legend, the quiet consultant who had, through unconventional means, liberated Willow Creek. Neighbors would give me knowing smiles or discreet thumbs up. Some even left small offerings on my porch, a freshly baked pie, a particularly vibrant tomato from their now unregulated garden. Life returned to a new, more pleasant normal. My vacation to Southeast Asia was rescheduled, and this time, I actually got to enjoy it. The legal battles for Brenda and Richard rumbled on for months, culminating in hefty fines, mandatory community service, ironically, cleaning the actual community clubhouse they'd disdained, and probation. Their reputations were in tatters. The Escalade was eventually sold. I imagine the upkeep became difficult on a reduced income. I never saw Brenda in fuchsia again. She mostly wore drab gray after that, a fitting color for her deflated ego. The entire saga taught me a few things. Firstly, never underestimate the audacity of an entitled HOA president. Secondly, sometimes the only way to deal with an immovable object of arrogance is with an irresistible force of nature, or, in this case, a 7-foot alligator. And thirdly, always keep meticulous records, and have a good, if unconventional, contingency plan. My home was mine again, my sanctuary restored. And Willow Creek Estates, finally free of its self-appointed queen, breathed a collective sigh of relief. So, drop a comment if you've ever had an HOA nightmare, because believe me, I get it. And sometimes, you just have to get creative.